Hi everyone, welcome. I'm really sorry. Either Peter, maybe if there's any late arrivals, if you can let them in. I asked security to unlock this door for us, but I think it didn't go through. It's still red, isn't it? Yeah. No worries. Thank you so much for coming for this guest seminar. Our first guest seminar. We have two back-to-back by Nuno Nunes, who is visiting us from Lisbon. Before I introduce Nuno, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, north and south of the Brisbane River, and pay respects to owners past, present, and emerging. And it's a very nice venue to do this because as we are going to be hearing from Nuno about his work, we're also overlooking Baramban, right outside the Victoria Park development, which is not only really nice to have so close to campus, it's also been in the news recently and even this morning because of the controversy around stadium development. So by acknowledging country, we probably also want to acknowledge that country isn't there forever. It can disappear very quickly. And if we don't pay attention, then that's probably what's going to happen right next door, which will cause a lot of traffic congestion and a lot of construction noise for the years to come between now and the Brisbane Olympics in 2032. Nuno and I have been friends and colleagues for quite a number of years. I'm really pleased that both Nuno and Valentina are here. I'm going to do a proper introduction for you tomorrow. So Valentina has to wait. I did ask who wanted to go first, and so it's Nuno who's going to do the honor today. Nuno's a professor at the University of Lisbon. He's the founder and president of the Interactive Technologies Institute, which is Portugal's largest research entity in interaction design and human-computer interaction. So we're very fortunate and excited to have Nuno here, who's representing quite a large entity there, and then going to introduce some of this work to us here in the School of Design and the Faculty of Creative Industries, Education, Social Justice. There's been also a collaboration with Carnegie Mellon University and a cross-affiliation over there, which is also a very prestigious HCI interaction design program at CMU. So we're interested to see what that will look like, as you know, there is obviously a lot of movement right now in the US with regards to funding decisions, and some of our colleagues here even have received a dubious kind of questionnaire of how they're spending the funding that is coming from America. But Carnegie Mellon has quite a lot of colleagues in interaction design that we have been collaborating with, and we know, so that would be very interesting for us to hear about as well. And a very quick plug, I'm sure Nuno is going to do a much bigger one, is that the Designing Interactive Systems Conference that we had the pleasure of hosting in 2016 is going to be hosted in Madeira in Portugal. And you guys are going to be involved in that conference as well. So do check out the DIS, the DIS conference on the ACM SICAI website. Now, I'll have a nice little segue. We might go to that slide over there. Because the other part of our collaboration has been that Valentina and Nuno have kindly contributed a chapter to a recent book that is in the process of being launched. It kind of has had a soft launch because it has been released by the publisher. It has an ISBN number and a DOI number, but the printed copies are not yet in my sweaty hands. So I'm still waiting for those to arrive. I think the publisher said it's going to be around May that we will actually see printed copies. This is culminating in the research that we have been doing in the design lab over a number of years, probably going back to 2016, 2017, when we first looked into blockchain and what blockchain can do for designers, what designers can do with blockchain in addition to what computer scientists do. And that led to a program of research over a number of years that was funded by the Food Agility CRC and the Future Food Systems CRC. And we've completed that work, but we've also been working on this edited book that is bringing together a whole bunch of authors internationally, including Valentina and Nuno and the team, to look into projects and examples and cases of how blockchain can be used, not just for pornography, not just for cryptographic speculation, but for good. And so the subtitle there is the transformative impacts of blockchain for people, community, for industry, community, and the planet. And we'll hear a little bit more maybe of Nuno and Valentina's contribution there. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Nuno. Just some housekeeping. The toilets are next to the elevator out there along the corridor. We do have some catering afterwards. There's some sandwiches and some water. The water, unfortunately, is in these plastic bottles because that was the only way for me to get here very quickly. Guillotino has dedicated containers. So once you're done with your water bottle, please put them into the white containers that you find next to the elevators. You will donate 10 cents to our research doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you. Thank you for a nice introduction. I'm going to give a very broad presentation about a project that myself and Valentina and other colleagues at ITI have been involved, called the Bauhaus of the Seas. But before I go there, I wanted to say that part of the reason why we are here came from this collaboration that Marcus already explained on trying to understand how we could use digital technologies, in particular blockchain, for social good, not just for the other applications that Marco just talked about. And so we had a paper at CAI recently where we are trying to discuss that. And I'm going to try and give you also a reflection on part of this work and the work that we've been doing on the Bauhaus of the Seas, related to the fact that many times in HEI, in interaction design, we tend to not give enough importance to the economic dimension of the interventions that we have. And that might be one of the reasons why we are so unsuccessful in bringing about the change that we all want to do. So this paper actually talks about that. The chapter also hints a little bit about the topics that we do need as interaction designers, as designers of technology, to be aware that we need to face the economic dimensions of sustainability in order to have an impact and to have many of our solutions adopted. And that's one of the reasons that brought me to the Bauhaus of the Seas. Just a little bit of a brief history about it. This is a European Commission initiative. It's very unlike in Europe that we have something coming top down. It was actually generated by the president of the Commission, von der Leyen herself. And after COVID and with the climate crisis, she said that Europe needed a new Bauhaus. It was controversial, and we published a paper about the controversies of bringing back the name of the Bauhaus, as probably many of you know. But what happened is that when this initiative was announced in Portugal, I approached the Minister of Science and said, I think Portugal needs to do something about this. Design historically in Portugal has not been as prominent as we would like to, and I thought this was a great opportunity for us to do something about it. So I was appointed to coordinate a working group with the Portuguese government to come up with a vision of what the Bauhaus, the new European Bauhaus, could be seen from Portugal, from a southern European country. And that's how the Bauhaus of the Seas emerged. So we actually published the manifesto, the original manifesto at Design Issues. And basically the idea that we came about was that if we wanted to reimagine the Bauhaus 100 years later in a completely different context, and not coming from a war and trying to rebuild Europe, but rather trying to face huge problems like the pandemic and the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and now as we all know, many other challenges that we have politically and internationally, we thought that, and me having grown up in an island in Madeira, actually that's why the IS is in Madeira, we are chairing the conference and bringing it back there. And actually our institute was born in Madeira. The idea was that, can we bring the Bauhaus into the oceans? Can we look at the oceans as, the last frontier of sustainability and really try to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes in the ocean and the water bodies in general that we did on land. And so that's how the Bauhaus of the Seas manifesto came about, together with some other colleagues. Many of them were architects. I'm not sure how many here are coming from architecture versus design. I know that Claudio was supposed to show up, but I was thinking this would be more of an architect audience, but I was mistaken. And so the idea was that we joined with some architects, some designers also, myself coming more from technology. I'm a computer scientist by training. And we came with this idea of a Bauhaus of the Seas. What would it be if we were able to do a Bauhaus of the Seas? And you can read the manifesto, the original manifesto, and we wanted it not to be, despite the logo that was created by one of the co-authors, José Albergaria, probably the best graphic designer in Portugal. We didn't want the Bauhaus to be about, bringing the principles of the original Bauhaus into the ocean, which is basically what the logo tries to propose. And so again, like I was saying, this was a call from the new European Bauhaus, from von der Leyen herself, the idea that we could have these dimensions of sustainability, inclusion, and aesthetics together in something that will be a European Bauhaus. I said it was a top-down approach, but actually the process in Europe has been quite co-designed, participatory. So there was multiple calls for people like us that came with this idea of a Bauhaus of the Seas, many others. There is a Bauhaus of the Woods, there is a Bauhaus of the North, there is a Bauhaus of the South, typical European thing. Everybody is trying to push the Bauhaus on their side of the continent. And then there was a call for lighthouse projects, so projects that will kind of inspire what this movement would be about. And we won one of the 6 projects. And personally, I'm interested in digital as a technology of scale that brings together these 3 dimensions and tries to create solutions that could be replicable, because we know that this is technology of our century, like it or not, and that we could use technologies like blockchain, AI, and I will give you some examples, VR, many of them are interactive technologies, of course, in order to kind of try to, like I said, scale solutions, try to come small, as I will explain, and then use the technology to scale up these solutions. So this is, in a nutshell, what the new European Bauhaus is. We also published a paper where we make a critical analysis of what the Bauhaus of the Seas should be and what the Bauhaus of the Seas should not be. We do acknowledge that there is a strong Eurocentric deepness in the name Bauhaus itself. It was very controversial even inside Europe because it was typically a very German and then moved to the US, but it started as a very German school. It was clearly a school where women were not allowed, for instance. So it had a very, very strong ideological stance, whether the original authors of the Bauhaus wanted it or not. And we wanted to move away from that. So we published an article actually led by one of our postdocs who is from Brazil. And we are actively trying to bring the idea of a Bauhaus of the Seas to many places in the world. During our sabbatical, we've been doing that. From Brazil, we went in Manaus, to Singapore, now here in Australia, New Zealand. And the idea is that we don't want this to be kind of a Eurocentric vision of what a Bauhaus in Brisbane should be about, or in Manaus. Rather that we want this to be a movement that everybody can adapt locally and try to adjust and adapt to the local context. And that's something we described in this critical article that we also published at Design Issues. So the idea, how can we, move away from this extractive economic model that Marcos referenced when everybody's facing, we're facing here with the Olympics coming, we are facing that in Lisbon, we are facing that in Madeira, where I come from, where, tourism and over-tourism is killing one of the most important biodiversity hotspots of Europe. And how can we use a movement like the Bauhaus of the Seas to try to counter that, but doing it in a way that is positive, that is inspiring, that is not, threatening people, and what we call in the co-design process an intergenerational, interspecies, and intercultural movement. So we don't want to tell people, I don't personally believe, telling people you don't have a future, we're all going to die from the consequences of climate change is not necessarily something that, is going to make people happy and is going to mobilize them towards a common future. And I think many of the extreme right movements that we are seeing emerging all over the world, in a way are surfing the fact that we, many times when we push these new agendas, are not giving hope to people. And that's something that I think is very important and is hopefully working well in the Bauhaus of the Sea. So that's how the project started. There was a big, fight for funding. These calls in Europe are quite competitive. I don't know this one in particular, but calls in Europe these days are like 0.15% acceptance rate. I don't know this one, but probably was around 1%. So we got it funded. We were able to bring together several lighthouse projects. So the project actually involves 7 lighthouse cities, pilot cities, 2 in Portugal, Lisbon and Oeiras, who are 2 cities, one next to the other, 2 in Italy, Genova and Venice. So Venice wanted to go for their own lighthouse project, but we were able to join forces. One in the Delta between Rotterdam and Antwerp. So it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, logistics center related to the ocean in Europe. One in Hamburg, and finally another one in the Øresund Strait between Malmö and Copenhagen. The idea was that many of these places, and we picked them up, some because of political reasons, like Venice, we wanted to join, and they wanted, Venice, if you think about the Bauhaus of the Seas, probably is the best example you can find, at least the most important iconical example. But we want to also to look at many different ecosystems. So rivers in Hamburg and in Lisbon, the lagoon in Venice, but also the ocean in Rotterdam or the Delta in Rotterdam. So we wanted to look at different types of ecosystems and try to see if we could test ideas that came from culture and art, and I will explain that a little bit later. And we wanted to see if we could scale them as actually solutions that could bring about change in these areas. We all know what are the problems that these regions face. Coastal regions, problems related to the preservation of cultural heritage. In New York, there was a big infrastructure done to try to protect the city from the rising seawaters. You can't do that in Venice, or at least you can do, and there is a big infrastructure there called the Mamlø that tries to prevent the flooding of Venice even more than the traditional used to do. But you can't do that in Lisbon, for instance. I'm not sure about what is the situation here in Brisbane, but I'm sure it's probably quite hard to do some of these things if you want to preserve, especially the cultural heritage. Many of these regions have huge pressures from tourism. Lisbon, Venice, in Venice, you can't find the Venetians, and actually the pilot that is looking at older people as the few that remain there as local citizens, and regeneration of ecosystems and supply chains that depend on the coastal areas. So for those, we know that there are solutions, and everybody is trying to find their own solution. Many times they are trying to find the solution from a specific angle. So engineers or urban planners or designers, everybody's trying to find solutions, but it's very hard to bring them together. And again, like I said, the idea is that we want to use digital technologies as a way to scale these solutions. For the project, we created this metaphor of, because it was the Bauhaus of the Seas, of a drop. So I will show you, we had several drops. A drop is basically an art culturally inspired solution that we felt could be dropped in a particular region, community, and could have an effect. That effect we call the ripple. And the idea is that if we did this at a very small scale, if we studied the consequences of drops happening in different contexts, we could have a scaling effect, and we could influence other people. So this is the idea of the ripple. And actually, we have if you're interested, then I will leave you a link to a TV series that emerged from the project with several interviews about the drops. It's called Drop, Ripple, Wave. And the idea is that in each drop, we wanted to make sure that there was space for the engagement of the community, for people to get inspired to experiment, in what does it mean to have a particular drop happening in a particular place, in a particular community, because it's always different. I will show you one of the examples of a drop is a regenerative menu. So a menu that, by eating that menu, you're having a positive regenerative effect in your regional ecosystem. But that drop in Manaus is very different from that drop in Lisbon, is very different from that drop in Brisbane, if we wanted to do that. And so the idea of the drop is that you take one example of something that worked and you try to apply it to a particular context after spending time doing a co-design process. And so each pilot was able, each city, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the European funding scheme, so it's the project itself is like 14 partners. In each pilot, like in Venice, there are different partners. We usually have an academic partner, typically like the University of Venice or the University of Lisbon. We have a territorial partner, which in the case of Venice it's very complicated because Italians are even more complicated than Portuguese. So it has the Port Authority, it has the City Council, it has the university, two universities, and then it has the Italian Institute of Technology. There are 5 partners just managing the pilot in Venice, which is kind of a recipe for disaster. And I already don't have hair, so it doesn't matter. But it's been quite a challenge to manage some of these things. But in each pilot, we have these different partners, and these different partners have a kind of a design framework they need to use, which I will show you. But before that, I wanted to explain what were the drops and how they were born. So I'm not going to show examples of all of them, but something that is unique in the project is that it has a strong curatorial component. So the institution that is managing all of the pilots is actually the Thyssen-Bornemisza Foundation, which is one of the most important cultural foundations in Europe. It's based in Madrid. And they are the ones that are curating the pilots in each one of the cities, which is, again, on top of the complexity of each pilot, you're having a curatorial team trying to manage engineers and academics and city councils is quite interesting. And they were the ones that selected the drops. They said, these are, artistically, culturally inspired experiments that we feel should be scaled. So this is, I'm not sure if you know about this one. It's a very interesting one called Climavore by Cooking Sections. The idea, as you can see from the word climavore, is that you could have a way of eating that would adapt to the climate. And they actually do this by creating these installations. These are for oysters. They have a filtering effect, as you know, in the waters. We have a lot of them in Lisbon and nearby. And these structures, when the tide goes up, they become submerged. And so they basically work as a replication for oysters. And then when the tide goes down, they become places where people join and eat together. And by doing that, they have become more aware of the changes in tidal changes that are so important in these areas. But at the same time, they understand that the way they eat has a huge impact in what they can do about the ecosystem that they live on. Another example of a drop, more related to architecture, was this reef by Superflex, which is another very important design studio. I'm not sure if you've heard about them. If you've not, check them out. They are amazing. So they create these sculptures that are not just for humans, they are also for animals. So these sculptures, underwater sculptures, are sculptures that have a regenerative effect in the ecosystem. And the idea is that they are also beautiful for human beings. And in this kind of connection between something that is beautiful to us, aesthetically pleasing to us, or I would say experientially aesthetically pleasing to us, they are also having a benefit to the ecosystem. So we wanted to take some of these examples and say, can we do this at scale and have actually an impact in the ecosystem? So there are many drops. I'm not going to go through all of them. Valentina keeps telling me that this presentation is too big. I will talk a little bit about 3 or 4 of them. So one of them is also the idea of multi-species assemblies. The other ones are, Blue Seniors was the one that is specific to Venice because of the older people that live there, and the idea that we need to have an intergenerational co-design process in order to have something that sustains itself in the future. Otherwise, we will always have the younger generations against the older generation, then this doesn't work out. So, but anyway, there are all of these drops, and for each drop, you can find information on the website. So the drops were chosen by the pilots. So Venice, from the catalog of drops, said, I want to do this one and that one. And Lisbon decided to do the generative menu, and Oeiras decided to do ocean literacy, and so on and so forth. So they picked up like from a catalog of these kind of art-inspired, and we said, now we are going to do a co-design process with the community and try to see how can we adapt, for instance, the regenerative menu to the local context. And that's how we kind of interpret the 3 dimensions of the Bauhaus of the Seas, of the new European Bauhaus in the context of locally grounding the 3 dimensions of aesthetics, sustainability, and inclusion. And by doing that, and this is actually work by Anne Light, our colleague who is part of the project from University of Malmö, and Anna Saravalli, and they came about with this co-design process that has been published also, where you try to map the co-design process in these dimensions, but not kind of making you necessarily choose between 2 extremes. We want to be on the right side, so we want to have not top-down solutions, we want to have locally tailored solutions. We don't just want to consult citizens and kind of just check that we did that in order to do whatever we want to do, which is a very typical approach that you have in politicians, but we actually want to involve them. We don't want just to be aesthetically pleasing, like, a beautiful sculpture that has no function. We want it to be something that is relational in the aesthetic component. And so in each one of the pilots, we did a co-design process. It started with a small pilot team, typically the partners of the project in that particular territory. Then it got expanded with the C Forum. So we created the C Forum in each one of the pilots, and we keep growing the process, including more and more community members, to the point that we also included the More Than Human component, and you have here a More Than Human research center. We did this through the Speaker of the Living, which is a component of the ZWOOP model that then was adopted in each one of the pilots. Here, the Speaker of the Living is someone that was appointed to the C Forum to represent a particular non-human element of the ecosystem. It could be a garden, it could be a particular species that is endangered, it could be a salt marsh, so it could be anything that particular community thinks is relevant for their decision. And we wanted to push that a little bit more with the ZWOOP, and I will explain that later. So every pilot started with a co-design process. I can tell you it was very challenging. This was year 1 of the project. After year 1 of the project, I started listening to people from the municipalities talking about interspecies and, the Speaker of the Living. And I was like, wow, this can be done. I couldn't believe that these people were saying these words 1 year ago. So it actually worked, and it worked on a Southern European country. I'm not sure about the context in Australia, but in Europe, it's very different. You want to do things in Sweden and in Portugal or in Italy and Denmark, it's very different. And so doing this in the south of Europe to me was quite interesting. So the same approach was also used for other things. So this is an example that is not directly related to the Bauhaus of the Seas, but it was about the public consultation process of the airport of Lisbon, the new airport of Lisbon, which has just taken 30 years to decide what it should be built. And it's been like 30 years, and finally in the beginning of this year, the government made the decision. And so a colleague of mine from the school was invited to lead this independent committee. And she came to me and said, I would like you to design the digital platform for the public consultation for the new airport of Lisbon. I said, yes, I will do it, but I will do it on my own terms. as long as you agree I can do whatever I want, I will do it. And so I worked with Travis, who did a very interesting system called Consider It, and we designed the public consultation platform. I'm actually spending part of this week here writing the paper about it because I didn't have time until now. And it had more than 150,000 contributions, the website. The second best location for the airport came from the communities through the system. It was a location that nobody ever heard about. And what we tried to do, as you can see from this example here, was to actually avoid that people polarize their opinion by using this kind of visual representation. So when you choose if you agree or disagree with a particular option that is there, do you agree that the airport should prioritize environmental issues? You can choose on a scale of totally disagree to totally agree, and you position yourself there. While you're doing that, you will see the arguments for and con that opinion. So, and you can actually comment on that, or you can add more things. Why do I disagree with this option or not? And the results of this, I'm still analyzing all of the data. Apart from finally the government decided where they are going to build a new airport of Lisbon, whether this is going to happen or not, this is Portugal, I don't know. Actually, the government just failed. We'll have elections again in May, but it seems that at least they've chosen the place. But as you can see, it's very interesting. This is data that I just analyzed this week, actually yesterday. The polarization exists in many of the topics. So this is, I'm not going to go into the details, but you can see on these density charts that there is a lot of polarization. But when you drill down, you can see that in some topics, so here is environmental concerns, here is the economic impact. So what you can see here is in environmental concerns, typically people tend to agree. So they tend to be towards environmental concerns, with a few exceptions. One of them is, what about the airport and climate change? So here they tend to disagree that climate change is less important than the airport. And again, this is something that we need to reflect about, is that, you know, when faced between having an airport and worrying about climate change, people tend to go towards the disagreement. And on the economic dimension, for instance, things are a little bit more complex. So you can see, and you can see clearly from the graphs, I don't want to go into the details, but you can see clearly that it's much more spread. And again, this was a very, very successful example of using a participatory, a digital platform to scale a participatory process, which was quite successful in the sense that it kind of helped the government make a decision through an independent committee. But we wanted to go further. So in each one of the pilots of the Bauhaus of the Seas, not only we are doing the co-design process, but we are also adopting a new organizational model called the ZOOP. This was pioneered by Klaas here, who was talking to me on one of the episodes of the series that I talked about. And it's a new organizational model that brings the more than human. And that actually is being applied in the neighborhoods of Amsterdam. And so the neighborhoods organize themselves and they appoint a speaker of the living that is part of the organizational model. I don't know about the organization of QUT, but I'm sure you have a board somewhere that makes decisions. Imagine if that board, there was someone sitting in that board that represented the interests of the ecosystem where QUT is involved. And every year, every time they make a decision, someone could say, okay, this is against the more than human representative here, and I will vote against that. And so this model has been adopted, and again, quite successfully. We just published, it just came out on the Futures Journal, the paper describing the ZOOP. It was a very design-oriented contribution by Klaas, and we kind of made it into a more scientific publication. And it's based on a yearly plan. So you establish the ZOOP, and the ZOOP could be, again, for an organization, it could be for a neighborhood, it could be for any type of organizational structure. And what you do is that You appoint a speaker of the living, and that speaker of the living is part of the board, and you do a yearly cycle for each one of these ZOOPs. So every pilot in the Bauhaus of the Seas became a ZOOP or a proto-ZOOP, as we tried to say. We hope that this can be adopted further. And it's a learning process more than kind of an organizational model. It's a very interesting learning process. And the idea is that every time you make a decision, you need to take into considerations the rights of the modern human. And so I was experimenting with a student on the previous example of the airport. What if in the airport we also had AI talking on behalf of the non-humans of the Tagus River ecosystem, where the dolphin of the Tagus River could say what he thinks about where the location of the airport of Lisbon. Actually, we had a paper submitted to CAI that didn't got accepted about that topic. So the idea that we could even have AI speaking on behalf of the non-humans in trying to do that. And that's something that actually PhD student Joana Pestana, together with one of the co-PIs of the Bauhaus of the Seas, Mariana Pestana, was trying to do in a more kind of artistic way. She created this installation called EdenX, which is here represented with this. Is a beautiful kind of 4 meters high installation that tries to mimic the ecosystem that it's representing. Here is a forest. We did one with the river. And inside that installation, there are these panels, and these panels show these panels, in a way, show a dialogue between the different species of that ecosystem. So you enter the installation and you're looking at the screens and you're seeing a dialogue between the different species. And again, the idea in this example is that you could have people exposed to the dialogue between species and trying to see if that changes their behavior. So that's one area where we are actually actively working on, and we open to collaborations, is can we use AI to do these types of things? Of course, AI has been trained on a lot of human data. That's the data that has been used. And of course, it is anthropocentric, but can we actually try to train AI models that speak on behalf of other species? And how could this impact the scaling up of interspecies solutions like the ZOOP or interspecies assemblies like the ZOOP? Another example of a drop is ocean literacy. And again, not ocean literacy in the strict sense, but trying to understand how learning about the ocean could actually change the way people relate to the ocean. And this is a short video of one of our PhD students together with Valentina about trying to create a hackianos, as the name suggests.
Hackianos is a co-design platform fostering fact-inspired citizenship. Hackianos retains hacking culture and ethics to reframe the way we approach to Okeanos, the primordial earth-encircling river. That is what we today refer to as our hydrocommons. Building on the many more than human practices already in place, Hackianos aims at hacking the ocean-humanity relationship by jointly promoting digital and ocean literacy.
What I like about this was a short paper last year at DIS. What I like about this idea of Valentina De Marchi, our student, is that you can actually try to hack existing practices of co-design and try to bring them to the ocean, which is very much, the Bauhaus of the Seas kind of style. Another drop, which I will not talk about because is mostly the work of Valentina, is how can you use storytelling to also as a way to have a bigger impact with what's happening in these small experiments. Because I think, again, many times what we do is very experimental, is very small scale, and we don't have the means to project what we are doing. This is work done with Valentina on Memex, and she will talk about that tomorrow. So show up if you want to know more. And then I will conclude with regenerative menu, which is one of the most important drops, and one that I have to confess, very skeptical originally of how we could scale and actually have an impact, and it's been one of the most successful ones. The idea of the regenerative menu is inspired on the climber, for example, that I gave you, is the idea that can we create regenerative menus that have a positive impact in the ecosystem that we are part of. We all know about the challenges of and the impact of eating as on CO2 emissions and the environment around us. But it's a very complex, like many of these problems, wicked problems. It's very hard to explain to people what I can do in order to have a positive impact. And actually, I've learned a lot with colleagues from environmental engineering that are part of the project about that many misconceptions about eating meat is bad, eating vegetables is good. It doesn't work like that. It depends on the type of meat you eat. It depends on the types of vegetables you eat. And I'm going to give you a few examples that are quite controversial about what can happen and the importance of blockchain, that blockchain technology could have in this, like we hinted in the chapter of the book of Marcus, but also and other papers that we've been researching about. So this drop is happening in Hamburg. It was actually the first time. This is me it was in May last year. It was the first drop that had a public exhibition. That's another component of the project. So all of these drops have a big public component. So it's and in this case it's done on the Deutschtochal. I'm saying it is wrong. I was hoping that Marcus could correct me. Which is the Modern Art Museum in Hamburg, a very famous museum in Europe. And they did an exhibition and they brought a kitchen inside the exhibition. Actually, I have a photo of the exhibition here. And in that kitchen, there is also a fridge. And in that fridge, there are a few fish that inhabit the Elbe River in Hamburg. One of them is a huge fish that was introduced by mistake or by careless intervention in the ecosystem, is actually destroying the whole river. It's a huge fish that is a predator that is killing everything. One way to fight that is people started eating that fish. The same thing is happening, by the way, in Venice. Venice has been invaded by the blue crab. And one way to, in a way, counter that is that people started eating that crab and kind of rebalance a little bit. As predators that we are, we try to rebalance the ecosystem. What is the challenge is that people in that specifically in that region of Europe don't like to eat that fish. And so this fisherman came up with this brilliant idea, was to create sausages out of the meat of that fish. And so we actually ate the sausage of that fish and it tasted like a sausage. And so the idea that you could reintroduce this new species in the diet. And this is, again, probably not the type of regenerative menu idea that you were thinking about when I talked about that. But it's the type of things that we are trying to do in the Bauhaus of the Seas and have been quite interesting because it's, again, there is not, especially for us Southern Europeans, there's nothing more important than eating. And that's where we meet, we talk with other people, and then finding creative ways in which we could change the diet or the menus of people in specific regions could have a huge impact in the emissions. Another example from a student, Katerina Iglozaki, she started studying before she came to do the PhD with us about Mar Menor. I'm not sure if you heard about Mar Menor. It's the biggest lagoon in Spain, the biggest salt lagoon in Europe. It was one of the most important biodiversity ecosystems, and it was completely destroyed by the excess fertilizers that were used in agriculture in that area. There is a long history to this problem. It was quite known because it was the first entity, it was the first ecosystem that was given legal entity in Europe. So it has its own rights. It had a legal status. It has a legal status now because of the huge impact that it had on that area. And Katerina was studying this example, and again, what could be done to try to avoid these kinds of disasters. And actually, we did some research about it. And that area is one of the biggest exporters of vegetables, special lettuce, in Europe. And so again, when you think about eating salad in Munich, you're a vegetarian, very worried about the environment. And by eating that salad, what you're doing is basically generating this effect in the south of Europe. The same thing is happening in the south of Portugal. And we have been talking with people from agriculture, and they say, we plant what people want to eat. Don't blame me for earning a life by being a farmer. I do what people want. I grow what people want. So we need to find more. It's much more complex than we would like to know. Sitting in having brunch in Munich, thinking how horrible it is, what's happening there, and not thinking that you are the person responsible for that, even if you are a vegetarian, if you're just eating brunch. Thinking about these things is something that blockchain could be quite useful, because it will enable you to trace the origin of what you're eating, and making you reflect on what you're eating, not making you feel guilty because you're eating meat and feeling good because you're eating vegetables, when those vegetables are actually could be the cause of many problems that are happening in many other regions. So the idea that Katerina has been proposing is to use IoT sensors and to design interventions that could be traced by blockchain in order to have a positive regenerative effect in places like Mar Menor and many other places, especially in the south of Europe, where these interventions are having a big impact. And I will finish with the last drop, Living with Water, which was proposed by Rosi Braidotti, that probably some of you have heard about. Is a very important environmental humanist philosopher. She's also part of the Bauhaus of the Seas through the Hüttenius Institute. And the idea that she's proposing is that we need to reimagine the ways we live with water. And she is now based in Rotterdam, and of course Rotterdam is one of those places that is clearly dependent or interdependent with the water bodies. And this for us had a different challenge. So we are trying to, this is work by our PhD student also together with Valentina, Beatrice Maggi Pinto. She's actually co-supervised with Carnegie Mellon, Jessica Hammer. And she was trying to reimagine how would it be to have a deep dive using virtual reality. So again, the idea of using digital technologies to try and make us live with water. And because she's a diver herself, so she designed this beautiful, together with Yannick Trindade, one of our postdocs, who is a brilliant game designer. She designed this experience in virtual reality where you actually go very deep in the ocean. It's a virtual reality experiment. So and in taking you down in this dive, basically you're taking by animals. You start with the seal there. The seal invites you to start diving. You have to actually make the diving movement in order to go down. And as you go down, you meet a whale and you have to free the whale. And then you continue down and then you hit the bottom of the ocean. And what happens there is that your body starts transforming. And so if you look at your hands, because in the beginning you have this kind of smartwatch that tells you how deep you are. And then as you hit the bottom of the ocean, you start changing, your body starts changing. So we are trying to experiment and learn about how these experiences promoted with VR and other digital technologies could actually help you experience what it is to be on a deep dive. So this work was published at TI, is going to come up at CAI in Japan, the first experiments of this work. And so in a nutshell, in many of these places, we are experimenting with some of these solutions. Some are working and are quite interesting, being adopted already by municipalities. Others didn't work as expected. And what was really interesting is that the ones that I was kind of more skeptical, like the regenerative menu, I was not getting it, became clearly very successful. Others that I was more optimistic about didn't have the results that we were expecting. I'm curious to know about Genova. I know they just deployed the storytelling drop there, which is one where we had a lot of expertise, but it's always hard to see how these things go. In Venice, this is an example in Venice.
Buongiorno. Allora, io sono nata a Venezia, però mio padre che lavorava a Milano. Allora io ho comprato a votare dentro la fabbrica, cioè quella ravina che si svolge al lago. E cosa facevano per insegnarci? Stavano in acqua, tanto non potevamo toccare, più c'erano pezzi di vetro che rimanevano appunti che rimanevano a dire che sono della lavorazione. E quindi per forza bisognava stare così e si imparava, se no. Dopo tutti i residui veniva una peata che aiutava peata e le vacche che andavano a Venice mettevano che era sulla spalla e fanno questa vasca.
This example is very interesting because, you know, like I was telling you, in places like Venice, very few people live there these days. Some of them, the ones that resisted, are the ones that still remember what it was to swim in the lagoon of Venice. So now it's, I'm not sure if it's forbidden, but in many places it is forbidden to do that. And so the idea was that they were organizing this boat trip to these older people where they were telling what it was to be living with water in Venice many years ago. And they still remember these people that worked in Murano, the area where they did this beautiful ceramic pieces. And so that's basically it in a very high level presentation of the Bauhaus of the Seas. What we want this to be is the beginning. So the new European Bauhaus in Europe is now launching 250 million euros. I hope that there are not going to be changes about that. So this project was just the first project. We will finish at the end of this year. And we are doing a lot of follow-up proposals in trying to explore different directions that we've started to open up with the Bauhaus of the Seas. Sales, that's why it's called Sales. It was the first project. Unfortunately, Australia is not part of the horizon. New Zealand, we hope to get someone from New Zealand. But if it was, it will be great. Or if you want to adopt some of these things here, happy to share everything that we have. We would like this to be something that is adopted everywhere. We are trying to do that with Brazil, with Manaus, and Belém, the two big cities in the north of Brazil, near the Amazonas. And as you can see that there, the situation is very interesting and also very, very challenging. And we'll be happy to collaborate with anyone apart from Marcus here to try and do something related to the Bauhaus of the Seas in Brisbane, in Australia, or in New Zealand. We'll see. If you're interested, there is this video series. We have, both of us have an episode there. Basically, people from the project talking to each other about some of the drops. It's a very easy way to navigate the project because I just scratched the surface of what we are trying to do. There are other components, like for people that are working in materials. I didn't talk about that one, Blue Maker Spaces. So how we can use regionally sourced materials to create more sustainable objects, and how this could be done. And before I close, and I think I did it in time, most of the things I showed here are the work of many people. So I'm just the captain of the ship, but there are many people that contribute to this. I wanted to acknowledge all of them, and that's it. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Nuno, to illustrate quite a variety of different examples and projects. I hope people online can hear me as well. If you have online any questions, you want to post them in the chat, and we get to you as well. But first, maybe we'll pass to you guys in the room. Would you like to ask them any follow-up questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. I was interested related with the technologies where we use you mentioned blockchain and artificial learning as we're using the project. I'm interested in what was the impact in the design of the project using this technology, the challenges, for example, AI. You talk about different buyers, non-intercultural backgrounds, and blockchain, the blockchain is once the data is on the blockchain, there are privacy risks need to be challenged. So what was the impact of this technology during the design of the project, and how were faced the challenges with this technology? Is there bias prior to the...
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. So the technology is actually coming up this year. We didn't start with technology at all. I mean, there were a few examples but it was side projects, the airport example or the Echo of the Abyss, the VR, but these were kind of independent, self-contained projects. For instance, with the blockchain, what we are trying to do two things. One is food chain, support of food chains. And in this case, traceability is not a problem, it's a feature, it's exactly what you want. And it could have a big impact. So part of another project with some companies in Portugal, they are starting, actually have a pioneering initiative in Portugal about the fish, which is marketed through a blockchain system. So when the fishermen are still in the water, they identify the fish and they put the fish on a blockchain, and you can start the process of bidding before even the ship hits shore. So which speeds up a lot the process. And it creates this traceability that people want. And I want to know where what I'm eating came from. That's really the key example of why blockchain could be important for this case study. Why is many of these solutions have trouble being adopted? Because a lot of the mainstream status quo doesn't want traceability. So it's the opposite problem. Traceability is a problem because many of the the people that intermediate this selling and buying a fish don't want this, because they are losing a leverage in the way they intermediate the market. And it's very hard because typically you're dealing with less qualified, more marginalized communities like fishermen and farmers. These people don't have the literacy to understand. They typically are more suspicious about why should I use this technology. They don't understand that this technology is actually there to help them. And if on top of that you put the people that take a large margin of the profit of these transactions by hiding them, that's the issue. So what I'm not sure, I mean, we talked a little bit about what is the situation here, but in many of the projects where we were called in, like using blockchain for good, they've been bumping into the fact that nobody wants this. Nobody who is established wants these solutions to exist. Another question is, I thought it was about AI. Yeah, I get a lot of these questions about AI and blockchain being, very energy, having a huge energy demand. And again, it's complicated. So the energy consumption of training AI model is huge. We know about that, although we've seen that, new strategies that have been used by DeepSeek, for instance, that are less energy efficient, more energy efficient. But the thing is that these models are there. They have been trained. I run these models on my laptop. So running the model, for instance, to support an interspecies assembly like my students were doing, it doesn't consume as many energy as running Word or PowerPoint. It does consume a lot of energy to train these models, but they are already trained. So why not use them for a good cause to try to do something that is interesting? The same with blockchain. I mean, Bitcoin is not necessarily very good we don't need a blockchain network that consumes so much energy, but there are solutions that are actually energy neutral of blockchain. So you can adopt those solutions, and that's what we are doing. You don't need to adopt the bad ones, let's say, in terms of energy consumption.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I guess my question is more about, I'm very interested in that regenerative stream in the project, and I really want to acknowledge and appreciate the amount of logistics and the art of communication with all these people who have to do. I guess my question is about, like, how do you decide, I guess, the the focus of that application. So for example, in Venus case, it was also one of the obvious problems where we have kind of invested the area, and that's why like we could potentially look into how to include it into the diet. But what about like other areas, like are you followed by the advice from scientists, or is it like fully co-design or with local communities? So how do you decide that in, say, like in Portugal, like looking into oysters would be the maybe first priority, or like why oysters not mean? Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested.
What are the, yeah, it's a very interesting question. So it in most cases, one of the things that surprised me more about that example of the regenerative menu is how much is already being done. So for instance, in Lisbon, we found out that there was a library and a community center very close to our lab that was already doing a very important program with the community about cooking. It didn't have the regenerative approach, but what we did is we hacked into that. So we said, okay, what about if we took these people that already work with the community, we partner them with the specialists that know what are the issues and the problems, and suddenly it's like magic, is that these people want to do that. They're already doing it. It's just that they didn't match the need for thinking in a regenerative way with the need to use cooking as a way for community involvement. So that's the case in Lisbon. In Hamburg, it was a little bit more kind of elite. So it was curated by the museum. So it didn't have the strong community aspect that we find in Lisbon and in Venice. In Venice was done with the local community also. So it depends a lot, but I would say it's usually a mix of finding people that know a lot about the ecosystem and the species and what could be done. Salicornia in Lisbon, and bringing those people together with the chefs and the artists and the community. And I think it was pretty easy because these people are here. You just have to find them and bring them together and make them talk. And then suddenly they figure out that they are doing the same thing. It's just that they didn't put the pieces together. So I saw this happening in Lisbon. And one thing that works is that you need people that work with the community. So this is in the case of the library, they work with a community there. They do these cooking workshops every weekend. They have a strong connection with the community. So you need that component, otherwise it doesn't fly. It kind of becomes a more elite thing, like what happened in Hamburg in a way. You need to have people that know about the regional ecosystem, what could be sourced from the ecosystem that many times is not used. And you need chefs, designers. So in Lisbon, we have the Gulbenkian Foundation, which is the most important cultural foundation in Lisbon. And they have opened a public call, where they asked for food artists to interpret these ingredients and experiment with that community. So in a way, the link was done with the artists. The other important thing is when you bring the cultural entities, which was something that we've done it, and that was not a surprise, you have a huge exposure to this. Suddenly you have this community together with an artist showing off in the big contemporary art museum, and then a lot of people see about it and they start talking. So I think you need to bring these three elements for it to work. But I would say it's very easy. You just have to find the right people and bring them together. And then they do it. You don't have to do anything.
Thank you.
All right, we still have the room for half an hour. So we might close the official part and can use the terrace to enjoy some lunch. I have been tracing the sandwiches all the way to Danny Boys, which is down the road. I'm not sure if it's going any further, but that's where the origin of our lunch is going to be. Thank you so much, Nuno. That was fantastic. There's lots to talk about. And both Valentina and Nuno are still going to be with us until the formal break. So if you would like to schedule a coffee meeting or over a glass of wine, please reach out. and grab them whilst we got privilege of having them here with us. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.